to the Happy Lawyer Project. I'm your host, Akoma Mronu, and I created the show to help lawyers find happiness in life with a law degree. Together with my guests, we provide the knowledge, skills, insight, inspiration, and encouragement you need to find your happy. Today's episode is brought to you by our wonderful sponsors over at Felix Gray Glasses. I fell in love with my own pair of Felix Grays when I was sitting in one of those really long presentations and noticed that I didn't have a headache from squinting to read the slides. Felix Grays are not only wonderful for the eyes, but they're a stylish way to decrease digital eye strain. If you're anything like me, you're familiar with the dry eyes, headaches, and blurry vision that is all too common at the end of a long day of sitting in front of a computer screen. And these glasses have fixed all of that for me. Best of all, folks, over at Felix Gray, they offer free shipping and returns with a 30-day risk-free return policy. If you're interested in learning more, head over to felixgrayglasses.com/happylawyer to let them know I sent you. I also want to announce this week's winner of the October giveaway is Stephanie337. Stephanie was so kind to leave me a review over on iTunes, and I just wanted to share with you guys what Stephanie had to say. Stephanie wrote that, "This podcast is amazing to listen to after a long day at the office. Akoma finds excellent guests and asks wonderfully thoughtful questions to provoke truly interesting conversations. I can always take something away from each episode, and I love Akoma's soothing voice. An excellent way to refocus and be inspired." This review particularly means so much to me because I know that at the end of a long day, the last thing you want to do is listen to somebody lecture at you. So the fact that I'm somebody you would listen to at that time means a lot. And I also am so grateful that you said that you like the sound of my voice, because even a year into podcasting, I still hate the sound of my voice. So it's reassuring to know that at least it doesn't bother some people out there. So thank you, Stephanie. And to everybody who's listening who hasn't left a rating and review, it would mean so much to me and really help out the show if you would just head over to iTunes and leave me a rating and review. It really only takes about a minute, and I would appreciate it so much if you did. Now it's time to get on to the show. So one of the common themes that I've started to notice among happy lawyers is their ability to focus on their strengths. I've come to see that focusing on what you're truly awesome at is a crucial component of finding happiness. And on this week's show, I chat with Amy Lipner about how her passion for writing and doing good led her to the law, and how that very same passion eventually led her back out of the law. We also discuss what it's like to live on a boat. I know, random, but yeah, Amy lives on a boat. So we dive into all of that and more, and I hope you guys enjoy. Welcome back to the Happy Lawyer Project, guys. Today I am really excited to introduce you guys to Amy Lipner. Amy, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much.
So I would love if you could just start by sharing a brief description of who you are and what it is that you do.
Sure. So I'm Amy, and as you obviously know by now, my background is in law. I was a litigator, but now I've transitioned. I've made a number of transitions, which we'll get into, but now I've transitioned to working for myself. I own a strategy and consulting business, and I work largely with mission-driven, impact-driven companies and organizations, helping them to just kind of figure out how to position themselves, how to talk about the impact and value-driven work that they do. And also I kind of also will go down and dig into the writing, the copy, and create the ads and the product containers too. So everything, I kind of do everything from strategy down to the words on the page.
I'm excited to jump into all of that. But before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about your legal background, and will be interested in hearing your legal origin story. How did you get into law? Why law school?
Yeah. So I guess my origin story starts when I was a scared and confused undergrad, graduating with an English and anthropology double major in 2008. I was thinking a lot about what I wanted to do, and I've always been very socially conscious. I was involved in a lot of organizations and kind of thought the nonprofit or like for good sector was something I wanted to pursue, but I wasn't exactly sure what that looked like. And I kind of figured that law, I'd be able to get a background in a schooling that would be able to give me a lot of options. I know you've heard this before and you're like, oh, you'll be able to do a lot of things with your JD. And I really, my like real particular interest was global food policy. So I thought that would be kind of a really interesting inroad to approach the law and like the food policy world from like policy and regulatory work. So that's how I ended up in law school, thinking that I could be like a do-gooder, but also like kind of in the back of my mind, knowing like maybe it's not the thing for me. And as everyone tells me, I'll be able to do whatever I want with this degree. So that's how I ended up in law school.
And how did you like law school?
Honestly, for my first year, I loved it. I was incredibly challenged. I had really engaging professors for the most part. I remember specifically in civil procedure when it like all clicked, I just felt like I was on top of the world. and that's such a like powerful feeling to feel so strong intellectually and like you really understand stuff that so many people don't. So my first year was great because I was so challenged. And then I went to a program. I went to Northeastern Law School, and it's a public interest oriented school. And the way that the final 2 years are set up, it's quarter system. So 2 of your quarters, you're in class as you'd expect. And then the other 2, you're actually working full time. So it was during those 2 quarters when I started working full time that I realized that, that perhaps the law might not be for me. And that's kind of like how the like world started churning, where I was like, oh, maybe I made a mistake. Maybe this isn't the space that I want to be operating in.
Did you ever consider dropping out of law school?
I never did. No.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, I think it takes a certain person to like even think about law school, and then it's just being goal oriented and like achievement oriented. Yeah, I never thought about it.
No, it's definitely a self-selecting group, because I remember the first time someone said that to me is like something that was an option, and I had never even thought of it.
Totally, it's fascinating, right? Like, it never entered my consciousness of like an option. I was like afraid of failing. And I did great, but it was like never an option to think about leaving.
So did you ever practice? You said you were a litigator, so you did practice. How did you decide to go into litigation?
So the food policy stuff I learned pretty quickly was kind of just a regulatory nightmare. And I knew quick enough that like that was not the space I wanted to be operating in. Like heavy bureaucracy wasn't the space for me. I liked litigation. So I've always, as the theme will be, and I'm sure, a lot of lawyers, I always wrote really well. And writing was the thing that I loved and like could really lose myself in. And litigation, I had some really great co-ops for what they were called at my law school. So I had some really great mentors, and I ended up having this opportunity to go back to the U.S. Attorney's Office for a year and explore. I was on the civil side in a really great office, really like smart, thoughtful people. So I practiced in federal court, and I did a little nonprofit work before that too, because my security clearance had to go through. So that's what I ended up practicing in, but it was not, it was so clearly not a great fit for me. I was just very unhappy. Yeah.
Can you talk a little about how that unhappiness expresses? Were you just like upset a lot? Were you what does unhappy look like for you, I guess, at that stage in your life?
Totally. So it was really, looking back, it's really interesting. It manifested itself in a lot of physical like symptoms. I emotionally was just like not chirpy and happy and engaged. But physically, I wasn't sleeping at night. I developed insomnia. I actually developed hives. I started to get hives.
Yep. I'm familiar with all of these symptoms. I've been there.
And this is not something like that's in my daily life now. So really just the insomnia, the hives. I was crying a lot. I was pretty like disengaged too I did, as you do, I did my work and I did a good job and I met all my deadlines. But like when I would get home, I just kind of checked out. And so and I know myself pretty well, and I know myself even better after that experience. And I just knew it was not my best.
So how did you make the decision that something needed to change? And then what did you decide to do first to make that change?
Yeah. So I realized, I kind of jokingly said that I felt like my JD was basically an advanced English degree. It was like an advanced BA. Uh, because trying to exit the law, and especially litigation, even though I was pretty fresh out of law school, was tough. You have to have a very, you realize you don't have a skill set that many companies or nonprofits necessarily wanted. So my first goal was to just find basically a bridge job. And I ended up in a really great position at Axiom. Are you familiar with Axiom Law?
Yes.
Yeah. So I worked for them on the business development side. Getting that bridge job was all I focused on for months, was just trying to find a way to develop my skills. I knew I needed a different skill set, and I knew that I could teach myself certain things, but being able to have it in that environment and with mentors around would be ideal. So Axiom was fantastic because they're a legal services organization. So I was able to leverage my legal background, but still develop basically how to run a business and learn how to run a business.
And I love the practicality of that decision. I think often people want to go from point A to point D, and it's just not possible. Not necessarily because it's I'm sure if you had tried for years and years or even months and months, eventually maybe you could have found something. But there is something to be said for taking incremental steps towards your goals.
Absolutely. And you bring up a really great point, was that even that early on, I really kind of harbored secret dreams of entrepreneurship. And I didn't know how that could look. I kind of not even thinking about quitting law school or leaving law school. It was kind of out of my whole consciousness about what starting something of my own could look like. So having that bridge job, that practical job, made a lot of sense to open up my world.
And so you were at Axiom. Did you start doing stuff on the side at that point, or how did you decide to make this next transition?
Yeah, so there actually is another transition.
Of course.
Which I think is exactly how careers go too, especially when you're developing a whole new set of skills. I kind of, with my fascination around entrepreneurship, I was very interested in the startup space. So I joined a legal tech startup that was basically a marketplace for startups and small businesses to connect with lawyers. And our company, it was called Legal Hero, would kind of act as that marketplace to be able to make those connections between the lawyer and the user. So I was employee number 4 there. And
wow.
Yeah, and it was great. It was a team of the 4 of us, 3 of us were attorneys, and the 4th was our incredibly talented developer. So he didn't need law school. But that was another way that I was able. My law degree ended up taking me so far, and it really allowed me the space to explore and develop different skills. And just being in such a small team, it was very strategic, very tactical, and it just, in that situation, you have your hands on everything, which was great for me because I could really see what I liked doing and what I didn't like doing.
I'd be interested to know, what did you like doing? What did you not like doing?
Yeah. So, I ended up in that role. I was hired to largely manage a lot of the sales and customer outreach and acquisition. But no surprise, I ended up really liking the writing and the marketing strategy. And we were writing drip emails, which are basically the emails, you sign up for something and then you get 5 different emails from a company. And so writing those and thinking about the voice that the company needs to have. So being really strategic about the brand. And I was working with, the 2 other attorneys I was with were fantastic. So it was just kind of thinking about how to be strategic and tactical. And then anything with words, I loved. I've always loved.
That's great. And I mean, it's so interesting because I don't know if you feel this way, but looking back, it all fits together so nicely. And it seems to all kind of be leading you to where you are today. But at the time, did you already start to know you were going to use that skill to go out on your own, or did that come later?
Yeah, it always, writing the story, looking back is always a lot easier than looking forward. I did not. I knew that there was a part of me that really wanted to have complete ownership over something. But again, I didn't know what that would look like. And to be entirely frank, it caused me a lot of anxiety because you want to know. You want to know what that next step is going to look like. And you know something isn't completely right, but you can't put your finger on it. You can't articulate it. But I knew I was developing skills and relationships, and I was in a work environment that was great. So at some point, and I think this like goes to your point about practicality again, you kind of have to think about like, okay, so what am I getting? And like, what is the value here, even if it's not perfection? Like, what's important that I need to be really focused on?
I love that you pointed out that you were getting skills and connections, because those are the two primary things. And I didn't think of this myself. I heard Tim Ferriss say it about how he makes decisions. And I was like, that's actually really poignant, because you can't know where things are going to lead you. But if you continue to build skills and relationships, it'll lead you somewhere good. You know, you're going to be growing, and you're going to be, I mean, what is life but relationships, right? So and we all know that the best jobs are got through relationships. Like that's how people land these like awesome opportunities. And I'm also glad that you mentioned how anxious you were and how stressful you found it, because I find so many of my listeners like you want to know, you know, they feel like they're doing that. They feel like they're building the skills and building the relationships, but they still feel this anxiety. And they're like, when does that stop? And I'm like, I don't know that it stops. So much as it changes and becomes more and less manageable at different points in your life.
Totally. And I would say too is like the more that I've dealt with it and have seen it work out, like the more experiences that I've had, the more I can kind of like talk myself through it. I'm still like, there's a reason I went to law school and there's a reason that I practiced and like never quit, exactly as you said. And like now it's just like quelling that anxiety and having some faith that things will work out, not necessarily how I dream them to be, but in a different way. And I like really try and balance that like trust with just being like, and I'm smart and I have these skills, and like reminding myself of the things that I have too, to know that like I can take care of myself and and it'll work out.
Yeah, that's great. And I mean, I have to do the same thing. I have to remind myself that I got myself here so I can get myself there.
Right. I feel, oh, go ahead.
No. And that doesn't sound that helpful, probably to other people, but it's very helpful to me.
Yeah. I was going to say, I feel like it's the thing that you need to remind yourself of all the time. And it sounds so benign and kind of like banal, like, oh yeah, you got yourself there. But really like, you know, you can, I feel like what being so miserable litigating taught me was like, it was such a low point in my life. I have not experienced anything as desperate feeling since then. And I think part of it is because like I saw that there's a light in the tunnel and like I know how to navigate around it, but also just like experiencing it, you can kind of like work yourself out of it from here on out. Like you've got it.
Absolutely. And knowing you've come back from that once, you know that even if it were to happen again, there's a way through it.
Yeah.
So you're at the startup, and how long are you there before you're like, I need to go out on my own?
Yeah. So I was there for just over a year, and then the funding didn't work out as we planned. And then the company ended up folding, which worked out really nicely for me and my personal goals. I moved across country. I ended in San Francisco. And what was so interesting about, I took some time and I did some traveling. I kind of like knocked some personal goals out. And what was interesting about the time was it was the first time in my life where I didn't, you know, have anything lined up, but I like trusted that this was the step where I'd be able to be self-employed and I'd be able to own a business that I wanted to. I like knew that was around the corner because I simply could not imagine myself working for anyone, which felt really freeing. And I for someone who tends to run on the anxious side, I really was able to kind of take that mostly in stride and know that I'd figure it out. So I can like close that loop, and I ended up in San Francisco. I started exploring, actually ended up working up an all women's co-working space. And it was there that I met two women in particular who were copywriters, which was a whole field and world that I really didn't know existed. I didn't really realize you could make money writing. It just like never occurred to me. So like immediately when I heard that, I was like, oh, like Amy, I think this is what you need to be pursuing. So that's how I ended up in the world of copywriting, and it tied in. I did a lot of marketing at the startup too. So like brand strategy and stuff kind of folded in really nicely.
So you've now been doing this for a while, and how do you find your clients, and do they kind of because I know you focus on clients who do good and are kind of making an impact in the world. Do you have to do some sort of filter process to say someone is qualified, or do you kind of qualify people through your process of onboarding?
That's a great question. So, I typically feel like if a company or organization is in some way like committed to some sort of good or social impact, I think that there's a lot of ways that can be explored. And so I typically am not like, I think the way that I write my webpage and the way that I talk typically filters out people who are just trying to, like greenwash their business.
Yep.
But that said, like, I do work with companies too, like trying to develop companies you wouldn't necessarily think of who are trying to develop their their CSR strategy or that kind of stuff, or just kind of bring more values-based focus onto what they're doing, how to language it, how to position it. It's also some of the things I do. So it's there's like different ways to be approaching it and approaching this world.
Okay. I think I'm like super excited to jump into kind of the nitty gritty of what that's like life is.
Yeah.
A copywriter after being a litigator, being at Axiom, being at a startup. I feel like you've had exposure to all different spectrums of both lifestyle and income stability.
Yeah.
I don't need numbers or anything, but where were you on the student loan situation, and was money a concern along your journey?
Yeah. So I was lucky, and in law school, I received a nice scholarship. It was not covering everything, but it definitely helped. So I wasn't exiting law school with an insane amount of debt, but I did have debt. And, along the way, I've been able to be smart with the way that I used my paycheck. So I was able to get my loans down to a point that didn't make me want to kill myself.
I'm with you.
Yeah. So, I was very strategic and thoughtful about how I used the money. My loans were always something that I was conscious of, but I never felt, it was not at the point that I felt like incredibly buried under them.
So have you paid them off at this point, or you still carry your loans, some loans?
I still carry my loans, but I'm at a really good, I'm at a really good place. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I'm in a similar spot where I kind of was really aggressive early on in my career when I was pretty sure I was going to quit every other day. So I was like, I have to pay off these loans. And then as things settled down, I just got to a place where I was comfortable and
exactly.
continued to pay them off in a manner that I feel, suits my lifestyle. So, but what were you doing during that time when you were off and weren't making money, presumably, or while you were building your business? Kind of how did you transition? Because I know a lot of people who have loans and want to make that transition, that's something they really worry about, is not knowing how long they may be out of a paycheck or maybe in a transitional stage.
Yeah. So for full transparency, my company folded. So I was able to collect unemployment, which carried me and gave me some stability while I was building my business and transitioning, which I understand most people don't get, right? That's kind of, especially when everyone's miserable, everyone's like, oh, like I wish I was just laid off. So I was lucky, but unemployment only lasts so long, and you want to keep moving along on your loans. So, what I tell people when I talk with people who aren't in that exact same position, and this is not going to be like a new suggestion, but to just start small and to start like building up an amount and to like for me, I really operate well when I have specific money targets or money goals in mind. So, if it's like you'd feel comfortable with 20,000 in the bank or whatever, and then you can start putting that away. But like when I have a very whole specific number and I reach that, that's when my like anxiety will lay off, when I like have set aside specific numbers.
That's great advice. And I think it's also, I mean, I don't know how much unemployment is. I don't know anything about unemployment, but I think for a lot of people who, I mean, you were coming from a startup, so I can't imagine that you were getting kind of a big law paycheck at that point. So for a lot of people who are sitting making really nice salaries, they could even conceptualize of trying to kind of almost create that scenario by saving enough that they could take out enough just to float for a period of time. I think that it's hard for people to imagine living on a much smaller salary than what they, people spend as much as they get if they're not thoughtful about their spending.
Golden handcuffs.
Oh, I know. I used to tell my husband, these golden handcuffs really match my skin. Like, it's so hard.
Yeah. Well, especially when you're working that much too. Like, you don't have time. You don't have time to do basic things. So you're like, what you need to do to sustain your lifestyle increases dramatically because, we don't have time to cook, or like you need to outsource a lot more.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's the thing, is that if you were in a transitional place where you weren't working 60 hours a week, you would suddenly have 60 hours a week to actually do your own grocery shopping and like push a vacuum across your floor.
Totally. And, I think that's just an adjustment. And to like, for me, like the amount I was willing to tough out, because like, yeah, my unemployment definitely did not last as long. Like there was definitely periods where my income was in flux and I like was like, oh, what am I doing? But I was so committed to what I was doing. And so I could not imagine anything else, that like everything, pushing the vacuum across my floor, it all seemed totally worth it to me. It was a trade-off that I was more than happy to make.
I love that. And did you feel like you had enough time? Like, were you worried that, I think people get really impatient and they want to just kind of like work 18, 20-hour days so it can happen faster? I guess, how did you, and how do you now kind of manage your lifestyle, since it's kind of up to you?
That's a great question. And I would say that like in general, the way that I approach my work and the way that I approach my work with my clients is a very reflective of the way that I work and the lifestyle that I want, which is I like to work with a small group of clients at one time so I can be incredibly responsive and like really kind of dig in with them rather than having a really high volume of clients. So that also means pricing wise, like my prices are higher than plenty of other people who, are just kind of like knocking out, headlines or ad sales, ad campaigns or whatnot, because I would much rather be engaged and be part of the team. So to me, that's like the lifestyle that I want, which is really getting to know my clients, having really deep relationships with them, and having the time to be thoughtful and creative and fun with what I'm doing. Those are all things that I value so much. And that's why I've structured my work world and my like personal world around that.
Do you work kind of like a full-time 9 to 5? Like, are you at the co-working space every day, regular working hours, or is it more flexible since it can be?
It honestly depends on the projects that I'm working on. When I'm like super head down, when there's over the summer, there was like a really intense project I was working on. So yeah, I was working like 12, 14-hour days, but that's fine. Cause then there's other times where it's a lot less. So I typically don't go into the co-working space like 9 to 5, but my hours, what's nice too is like I'll often, get up, do some work in the morning, go for a run or go to yoga class in the middle of the day, and then go back to work and then work later in the evening. That's just kind of like my working and creative rhythm. So I can kind of attune myself to that a little bit more. But, to be honest too, I have to do a lot more networking. I have to go out, meet more people a lot more. So the time that I spend, it's not, I feel like as lawyers too, just because you're like clock oriented, you think of your time as like, it's very discrete and specific, but it's really easy for me to put in a 12-hour day, even if I'm not sitting at my computer, like pounding out creative work that whole time.
And what is kind of the sustainability of this? Because the other thing that people worry about when they think about going out on their own is, can you actually take a vacation? Because when you're not working, you're not making money.
Yeah. So I am still finding the balance with that. I have taken vacations, but it's a lot of work heading up to it. I always feel like, am I missing something? What if my dream client approaches me and it's like, we need you this week. What would I do? I still haven't really found the exact answer to that. And I think the answer is boundaries. You need to set them up. And also there might be a situation where maybe the vacation you're going on is not as important, or you can do some work. I think that's the question for each person to ask themselves. But, I've been able to take vacation and I'm not working like insane hours where, I can't do the things that I want to do. I'm also someone who at this point has seen the other side and really values balance. And I realize that my work is better when I take time to go to a yoga class or walk or catch up with a friend for coffee. Or if I'm not feeling that inspired and all I have to do is supposed to like create something that's amazing, sometimes I'll take some time off and not, I can take an afternoon and not think about the work and then come back to it early in the morning. So the joy is that flexibility, but also that's that's also the sticking point.
Yep, which is often the case. And before we leave your business and chat about kind of some other more personal stuff, I have a quick question about the things you invested in yourself or the business early on. Were there anything that you spent money on that was really worth its weight in gold?
Yeah. So the one thing that I run a really lean business, and I feel like many of your listeners may or may not be that familiar with kind of the digital online entrepreneur space. I just kind of, because of what I'm doing now, I'm more familiar with it. And it's a very there's some really amazing stuff out there, but there's also just so many ways to spend your money. I'm kind of, there's so many, and there's all the things that you're not doing and need to be learning. And it's exhausting. And I mean, I understand what the ads are in the copy, and I'm still always like, oh my God, I don't even know how am I even functioning? I don't know how to do this social media strategy or whatever. But that said, I typically can walk myself off the ledge, and I haven't invested in that many things. The one thing that I did join this summer and that ran for 3 months was I am part of a group of copywriters, and the two people who started this Facebook group started a copywriter accelerator. The group is called the Copywriter Club. They also have a podcast. They're great. Happy to plug them. And they ran an accelerator this summer. And so it was a small group of 20 or so copywriters. We had weekly meetings, and, it was just kind of like figuring out how to position and getting the greatest benefit was we had a Slack channel where we could just ask each other questions. Like, we have a really difficult client. How would you deal with this? And just getting that feedback and having that community and camaraderie was huge. I felt like it was truly much more of an accelerator than any skills-based learning. I think as just coming from law, understanding how to write, specifically write for persuasion, I didn't need as much, skills-oriented stuff. There's plenty of that out there. But investing in something that allowed me to connect with other people was really helpful.
I agree. I am also a part of an accelerator club, which for the podcast, because I felt like I just needed someone to keep me accountable and to keep things going and really to grow it the way I wanted to grow it. And it's not even focused on the skill of podcasting or speaking or interviewing. It's really the building your business, managing your interview or your interviews, your calendar, all that kind of ancillary business stuff.
Totally. Yeah, it's community. I would say that, like, especially when you're making a transition, if in this case you're transitioning from law, the sooner you can get around other people who are thinking like you, whether they've been in law or not, or just kind of feeling the same way you do. And honestly, that's what I saw just joining. I'll add the women's community co-working space I'm into maybe as another investment or piece that kind of was critical for my business. And again, it was that community piece. Just seeing other people doing the work was really eye-opening. So community.
Absolutely. And it's so much easier today to join communities than it's ever been, and especially of like-minded people. I think there's a lot of value in face-to-face, but sometimes it's hard to find that community or that time to get that physical face-to-face, So get online and that can work just as well. There, between like Slack and Zoom and all the other resources.
Totally. And I'd say too that, the nice thing about the digital world is that you can so quickly find that community versus going to networking events or dinners or whatever. And you just kind of, you never know. And I do think you can streamline the process online a lot easier. And at first it feels a little like, but then you meet some amazing people and it's so valuable.
Yeah. And it's kind of like, remember when online dating first started and it was like the weirdest thing?
Totally.
And now it's completely normal for people to say that's how they met.
Yeah.
I mean, there are people who are older who will still find it kind of weird, but I don't think that, many of us would even, bat an eye if that's how our friends said they met their significant other. And it's similar with this type of community building and career focused or business focused tribalism that's developing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think, as I was saying, the like digital entrepreneur space is an odd space, but like it's also amazing. You get connected to the coolest people that you would never ever meet in real life.
Absolutely. But then you actually might. Like, that's the thing that's amazing is that as I'm saying how like easy it is to do online, you also see this increase now in like retreats and conferences. And people, they've put in a year or 2 years of getting to know each other online and they want to meet in person. And so they meet up at a conference. And I actually am going to a conference at the end of next month where I get to meet, one of my guests who I've never met. And it's his first time going to this conference. And it's just, we've been chatting back and forth about getting coffee or getting drinks and stuff. And I'm super excited because he's a lawyer who does finance. He's the Big Law Investor blog. Huh. And we were both finance nerds, so we're meeting at FinCon next month.
Oh, that's awesome. That's so great. Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's the same too with the Copywriter Club. Kira and Rob, who started it, did a really great job. And the Facebook community in particular is really supportive. It's one of the best Facebook communities. And yeah, at conferences and just like one of the women that I was in the accelerator with is coming down to San Francisco. So we're going to catch up and like, it's that kind of stuff that's amazing.
Yep. Well, I think that we've made it very clear how strongly we feel about digital relationships and friendships. And it's funny because that's how I learned about you. So
yeah, it all comes full circle.
Exactly. And I can't let you go before asking you about your current living situation.
Yeah. So I live on a boat. I live on a boat in Sausalito, which is a far cry from the cute little one bedroom I had in Cambridge, Massachusetts. The boat is it's my partner's. I moved out here because of him. And it is, it's roomier than you'd think, but it's kind of great. I'll wash dishes and little seals will come up and bop their heads and check out what's going on.
That's so adorable and amazing. My husband and I each have a bucket list of 5 things that we want to do before we die. And we can only have 5 things because we feel like if it gets too long, it becomes unwielding. And one of his is to live on a boat for a year.
Oh, well, I'm happy to give you guys tips when it comes to that. That's not one of mine. Yeah, there's definitely plus and minuses, but the view's pretty nice. There's something really nice actually about being on the water. Yeah, I've eased into it.
I think that, if it was docked, that might be different. I think he wants to like be out in the open sea. So I'm a little weary
We're
of
docked.
that.
we're docked.
All right. Well, I will come back to you when we finally decide to make the move onto the boat. Before I let you go, I just have a couple of quick last questions. One, knowing what you know now, what do you wish you had realized or known earlier about planning your life and career?
Yeah, I think we touched on it. And I think it's like to take some deep breaths and trust that things are going to work out. And I think it's also to just like trust myself and to like trust my internal compass and that things will work their way out and to like just go with it.
I think that's great advice. And it's so interesting how bad we are at trusting ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
and why we don't think we know ourselves since we spent our whole lives with ourselves.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of shoulds out there, right? And so it's figuring out which of those shoulds are like really deep, resounding yeses, and which ones aren't as important to you. And that's a whole process unto itself. And that's hard.
It is. And I have to admit that before I went through the process myself, I very much believed that it made me happy to make other people happy. Like I thought that's who I was somebody who was like naturally a people pleaser. And I thought that fulfilling shoulds was what I wanted to do.
That's so interesting. That is like so many layers.
Oh, it's insane. It's absolute insanity. It took a long time to unravel that for myself and understand like why I thought my entire self-worth was wrapped around other people. Like you can't control other people's happiness. So like setting up a life where you're trying to meet other people's expectations is exhausting and really unfulfilling.
Yeah. And I'm sure, at least for me, like anxiety and like worry and not trusting myself creeps up still all the time. It's not like I've gotten to some like crazy Zen place. It's something I'm still always reminding myself of and working through. But if I could go back and tell myself that's what I'd tell myself. And maybe if I heard that earlier, I would deal with it less.
Interesting. You think you still would have gone to law school?
I think about it a lot. Honestly, there was a lot of value. It carried my career. It carried my like, so yeah, I probably would. My career was absolutely not what I imagined it would be coming out of law school, but it gave me, it created all the opportunities that I have now. So probably I would have done it differently, but yeah, I also learned so much from being so unhappy.
That's a fair point. I think that the less pain you have and suffering you have in your life, the harder it is to make those transitions and those tough decisions. And complacency can be kind of the killer of dreams.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, looking back, I'm grateful for figuring out what it feels like to be unhappy, for those hives, those tears.
Yeah. I mean, discomfort will get you there. So
it will.
What is the best way for people to follow you and learn more about what you're doing, reach out to you?
Yeah. So
find you? I'd
love to hear from you. My website is amylipner.com. And then Instagram and Twitter are both, I'm Wayward Aim, WAYWARD I'm seeing the word wayward pop up a lot more now. And I feel like I've had that handle for many years. So I feel like I was really in front of a trend. So those are the two ways, to reach out. And yeah, I'd love to connect.
Wonderful. And I will leave links to all of that on the show notes so people can find you and if they want to reach out to you after listening to this. And I just want to thank you so much for being a part of this project and sharing your story and chatting with me today. Very last question I ask everyone before I end the show is, what do you think separates lawyers who are happy from lawyers who struggle to find happiness in life with a law degree?
It's a great question. I think we touched on them. I think there's fear and complacency can really keep you in a place of unhappiness. And, for me, the biggest thing is just like happiness comes from trusting yourself and like trusting that you can get through that discomfort to get yourself to a place where you'll be more fulfilled and satisfied.
I love that because that's, I mean, the truth is there's going to be discomfort, right? So it's not trusting yourself that you can have no discomfort, but that you have what it takes to get through discomfort. So I really love that advice, and thank you so much for being on.
Thank you. This was so much fun.
Thanks so much for listening today, and if you guys enjoyed the show, I'd love for you to share it or head on over to iTunes and leave me a rating and review. I know it's a huge favor, but it's really the best way you can show the podcast some love and help me grow the show. Lastly, I'd love to thank our newest sponsor, Felix Gray Glasses. It's super important to me and my mission here at the Happy Lawyer Project to only share stories, services, and products that I feel will truly help you be wildly happy in your own lives. So I've been really excited about my partnership with Felix Gray. Not only do I feel better since buying my pair, but I've also find it easier to fall and stay asleep. And as a lawyer, you know how crucial good sleep can be. So if you're interested in learning more, head on over to felixgrayglasses.com/happy lawyer to see if they'd be a good fit for you. As always, until next time.